Okay, we are live now. Just so you know.
Hello, Oxford.
All right, it's 7:30. Everybody ready?
Sure.
Okay, I would like to call to order the Tuesday, April 21st, 2020 virtual Oxford City Council meeting to order. Miss Eaton, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Ellerby,
Here.
Mr. Prithridge,
Here.
Ms. Ragu,
Here.
Mr. Snavely,
Virtually here.
Ms. Southard,
Here.
Mr. Brackett.
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Here. Normally, we would begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, but because we are all virtual, we're going to forgo the pledge, but I do want to affirm that we all support the values stated in the Pledge of Allegiance. With that being said, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
May I have a second? All right. Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes, here. We're going to begin public participation tonight with a proclamation. So I will read that. Whereas in 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees. And whereas this holiday, called Arbor Day, was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska. And whereas trees can produce oxygen, provide habitat for wildlife, reduce the erosion of our precious topsoil by wind and water, cut heating and cooling costs, moderate the temperature, clean the air, and to help absorb rainwater and slow the velocity of stormwater runoff. And whereas trees are a resource providing us with wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, paper, and countless other wood products. And whereas associated with the management of the approximately 3,430 street, park, and public trees in the community, the City of Oxford has fulfilled the National Arbor Day Foundation's requirement for Tree City USA for 24 consecutive years. Now, therefore, I, Michael Smith, Mayor of the City of Oxford, Ohio, Tree City USA, do hereby proclaim that on April 24th, 2020, the last Friday of the month, the City of Oxford will recognize and participate in the national and international celebration of Arbor Day. I urge all citizens to celebrate Arbor Day and to support efforts to protect our trees and woodlands. And I urge all citizens to plant trees to gladden the heart and promote the well-being of this and future generations. So there is that. We'll move on to public comments, but I don't believe we have anybody signed up for public comments. I see a no from Ms. Green, so I will move on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second by Mr. Prithrick. Are there any items to be removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. Moving on to resolutions. I will turn to Mr. Dreisbach for our first resolution. Or no, I'll have Ms. Eaton please read our first resolution. Getting rusty.
A resolution authorizing the release of a public improvement bond in the form of a letter of credit in the amount of $1,049,981.27 for the Gaslight Avenue at Stewart Square planned development and accepting a new public improvement bond in the form of a letter of credit in the amount of $161,421.39.
May I have a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second?
Seconded.
Second by Ms. Southard. All right. Now, Mr. Dreisbach, if you would tell us about our bond.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. When Council first approved the Gaslight Avenue development, a bond of approximately $1,050,000 was required to make sure that public improvements in this development would be completed. Much of the development has been completed. Phase 1 is complete, and much of Phase 2 is complete. The developers asked that the city reduce the bond. This is a cost to them to carry the bond, so it's in their interest to reduce it where possible. Our city engineers calculated the remaining improvements owed to the city to complete the development have a value of $161,421. This will ensure everything on the plans will be constructed either by the developer or for some reason they could not perform, could be performed by the city. And we would hold this letter of credit for that amount. So we recommend your approval tonight for this, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
All right. I don't think we received any public comments, so I'll open it up for council discussion and questions. All right. Mr. Prithrick.
So this seems really straightforward, and glad to see this project's moving forward. This is just since we're on this topic, people have asked the question about Rose Avenue. The city declined at the time of approval to require the developer contribute to improvements on Rose Avenue. But since we're on this topic, we'll be finishing the paving inside the development. But Mike, could you just kind of fill us in on what the plans are, if any, for Rose Avenue?
Right now, there's not a plan for improvement. That's a unique situation with a limited right-of-way, and some of the existing houses on West Rose are already, their front porches are almost up against the right-of-way already. So that's a tough call of how we proceed with that.
Okay, I didn't want to open up a can of worms. Just when you're on this topic, I wanted to ask the question. Thank you.
We're aware of it. The city manager and I have talked about how and when we could work with the developer to do something there. In hindsight, perhaps we should have required they improve it to city standards, but West Rose has always been a unique street and a hindrance to development. So will be for capital projects.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. If there is no further discussion, Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. All right. That resolution is adopted.
Thank you.
We will move on to ordinances tonight. Ms. Eaton, will you read our first ordinance, our first reading?
An ordinance adopting Oxford Codified Ordinance, Chapter 1148, entitled Landscaping and Tree Preservation.
All right.
Oh, we don't do that first reading.
First reading.
Yeah.
I am going to tap Mr. Perry on this one if he would like to, or Mr. Elliott.
Received one comment, Your Honor, and I'd like to read that since we just received one. This has to do with all 8 of these tree ordinances, if you will. It was received from Steve Dana, former council member of 131 West Collins Street. I strongly support all proposed ordinances. The zoning Code text amendment calls for linking the disconnected sections of landscape tree requirements. This is very smart because it acknowledges that connectivity in landscape supports robustness in natural life. This statement in particular demonstrates the thoughtfulness of the drafting, the proposed balances, the unpredictability of site development with a minimum baseline expectation for canopy preservation. The ordinances demonstrate meticulous standards in landscaping and planning. The tree planting and tree preservation requirements are sound. The requirements with respect to parking and trees are significant. The emphasis on planned development is highly desirable. See page 71 where planning and mature tree canopy is noted. Congratulations to staff of the city's development department and to the environmental and planning commissions for their hard work, Steve Dana. And I just want to ditto Steve's comment. As city manager, I do want to thank both the planning commission, the environmental commission, and certainly my staff, Sam Perry and Zach, for their hard work on this. A lot of work went into it, and I think we have a very good outcome here. So with that, Your Honor, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
All right. And I will turn this over to Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening. Hope everybody can hear me. It's good to see you all remotely. All right. So yeah, I'll do this in one presentation. I won't do it 8 times. And I'll give a summary, and I've got several slides that Zach put together for us. He did the bulk of the work in recent months. And as you know, this has been a several-year process that originated as a result of some development concerns from some neighbors of a development that's underway now. And through the process, we learned a lot about what our values were as the different boards and commissions looked at this, and how we, as was mentioned, there are disconnected sections of the code that had an opportunity here to bring together. So, so I'll get into that and share my screen here to go through this and kind of give you an overview. And I think it will help to bring it to light. And I hope you can see that. You should see a slide that says landscaping and tree preservation.
Yes, we do.
All right, thank you. So, okay, so this is just a little bit of history. It's mostly focusing on the recent history. So it's been in front of Planning Commission a few times and Environmental Commission. And so that's just a little bit of the history there. The recent 2 visits to Planning Commission were really effective as far as getting some of those final tweaks. But what's really missing that's reflected here is all the work that happened between the chair of the Environmental Commission and staff, Zachary Moore, our planner. It was really a monumental task getting all of these things together, and we look to other cities, but a lot of this is actually new territory because of some of the things that we're doing here with having a numerical requirement for trees that have to be replanted if some are removed in areas that are part of a development, while still balancing that aspect of economic development and the need for some parts of the city to be developed as the zoning map and the land use rights are inherent to the property owners. And some of the deficiencies we found in the process was that there really aren't universal standards throughout the different zoning districts. And so I won't read through all of those, but we did find that we lacked some mechanism within some of those discretionary reviews, plan developments, subdivisions. So while we desired it in spirit and we talked about it in our comprehensive plan, we lacked some of those details. And that was where it took a lot of back and forth between city staff and the boards and commissions to find a good balance. So we feel we're at that point now. This is a list of the chapters that are affected, and that 5th one there that's asterisk is actually a brand new chapter. So rather than taking those sections that were in the various chapters that have been amended over the years, we pulled those out and brought them into a new chapter and amended it so everything could refer to that. So that takes into account street trees that are being planted, and assumes that those actually have a net impact on the community as far as the canopy. And it also has provisions for exempting the counting of trees on parts of developments that are not going to be touched. Whereas some of those original proposals included requirements for that would spend a lot of resource by the developer to survey and count and measure, when really some parts of the development were not being touched. So that was something that changed. I will say, as we get into this, that this is not a clear-cut prohibition ordinance. This is not creating a new tree authority. This is trying to use the existing staff that we already have and use the development review process to trigger that review. Now, it will cause during that process of a development request to raise the question of should this part of the development be cleared or not. That will definitely happen, but it's not going to be a situation where we're monitoring every tree that's being removed in the community. That's not the intent of this set of ordinances. So applicability is fairly broad, but it is focused on the larger developments that would typically come through Planning Commission and City Council on what we call a discretionary review. It does go a little bit further than originally was drafted to take into account multifamily and commercial developments. So that's a newer aspect of this, because those do have an impact on the tree canopy if they are wooded sites. So those can be done in a more balanced way. And the tree requirement, you can see here we've got calculations for that. It's very standardized with the street tree requirement that we already have in effect for the 2-inch caliper tree. The threshold that you may remember from the previous review, if you're around for that, is 10 inches. And so anything over that can be counted as 2 trees if it's existing and it's preserved. So that really incentivizes for the developer or the property owner what's already on the site, rather than automatically having to plant new trees for every development. And there are areas, like I said, they're exempted. So beyond the 100 feet of the development boundary, and I've got a slide for that that shows an example development that is coming online soon off of 27 South University Park Boulevard, the Kettering Health site. So that'll help you understand the context a little bit. In areas that are near where there would be a new building, a new house, that type of thing, those areas would be exempt from having to be replanted because that's part of the impacted area. This is a graphic that a local design firm did for us to actually demonstrate how we intend for trees that are not going to be removed, how they should be protected. So this will go into our standard drawings that when someone does a development, that'll have to be included. So the contractor will actually see that and know what their expectations are for preserving and protecting trees that are not intended to be removed. So that kind of takes away that haphazard or ad hoc approach that might otherwise be considered a field change or something that just happens. So this raises that expectation level a little bit more. And then the other graphic we came across and had amended from another community up around Columbus was a tree survey. And so that was kind of a sticking point in the first round, both with staff and we pulled a couple from the development community, is what is expected in this tree survey. So here we came up with an example to put into the standard drawings for the city code, showing that you can use sample areas within a wooded area to give an overall flavor of what is out there, rather than surveying and measuring every single tree in a site. And so that will help the Planning Commission and City Council, rather than having to expect the developer to then to go back out and look at that. It's part of the submittal process in the beginning. Another thing that came up through the process was if there is not the ability or the desire of the developer or the builder to plant the tree on the site, then a fee could be established by City Council through the fee ordinance. It hasn't happened at this point, to compensate for that, and that would go into the overall investment of the tree canopy and the community. This I already went over. So what the types of developments would be: major subdivisions, planned developments, conditional uses. And then the new one was the administrative review. We also added a kind of a relief valve for the developer or the builder called the landscape plan review. If there happens to be a rub between the code and the project and the applicant, here's an opportunity that is not the Board of Zoning Appeals. So this can go to the Planning Commission to make, to potentially allow some relief for a development that wouldn't otherwise be processed as a new subdivision or a new plan development. And the Planning Commission recommendation was unanimous. So this is the second visit of the recent past few months. And there were just a couple tweaks that were requested that were put in there and found to be agreement by everyone in the room, by Mr. Gwynn from the Environmental Commission staff and also the commission. And it just came down to making sure that that expectation of the 2-inch caliper was actually in the code, even though it's been used elsewhere for street trees. So that was added, and that's in the proposal you have before you tonight. And I've got some other slides. I'll save those in case there's any technical questions for Mr. Moore, who I believe is on the line if needed. One slide I did want to show you, I'll skip to the end here, is the Kettering Health Site, which is in the process of going through the building permit review. So you can see what a 100-foot buffer would be around the perimeter of the development site. And so that would exempt the southern portion that's not being touched from having to be surveyed and counted. And that was one of the concerns that both staff and I think everyone had, was to not stop development by adding too many obstacles, too many new rules. So while this is a new set of rules and it's a lot of new language, it does provide some clarity, and we believe it brings it to a balanced point that respects the need for the community to have to preserve the overall tree canopy, but still allow development in a way that is sensitive to that inherent right for a property owner to develop the land that they own. So that's my summary. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. At this point, okay, we're open to council questions and discussions. Mr. Snavely.
I just want to comment on behalf of Planning Commission, first of all, to really give some congratulations to Zach Moore for taking a lot of very complex information and some objections that were raised by the Environmental Commission on first reading of this. And Zach put it all together, and the Environmental Commission was happy. The Planning Commission was happy. This has been through, as Sam indicated, long process, very detailed. There's a lot of technical stuff here, but I would like to share with my colleagues that this is a really good set of ordinances, and I think it's ready.
You're freezing up, Bill. Did we lose him? Well, I think we may have lost Mr. Snavely. There you are. He's back. Sorry, you were freezing up there. Now you're muted. Bill, you're muted. There you go.
Did you hear my comment?
Most of them, we lost the tail end of it, but
Okay. I just wanted to say that on behalf of planning that we support it fully. It's a very complex set of ordinances, and it's a good proposal.
Ms. Southard.
I want to say that it's been a long time coming, but I think it's been wonderful that so many people have put into so much work to make this happen. It's really an important thing, especially now that we are a tree city. This is Arbor Day coming up, and I can't imagine a more perfect time considering these ordinances this came up 3 years ago. It has gone through the commissions. The city staff has done an incredible job, and a lot of citizens as well, all of whom are, have worked hard. And I just, I'm so delighted. I'm thrilled that this is coming to us. And it couldn't be a more perfect time as we think about Arbor Day, Earth Day, which I'm going to say more about later, preserving our environment and taking care of this. So we're taking care of our city and the people here. And I just thank you all for the hard work you've done. I just think it's just wonderful. This came up when we were so concerned 3 years ago about some wetlands. And I think, these ordinances, I've read them, they're very carefully considered. And it looks to me, I know this is the first reading, but I appreciate all the good work that's gone into this. And so far, I didn't have any questions at all. I thought it all held together extremely well. And I can't think, others may have questions. In the next 2 weeks, we may consider those questions. We have 2 weeks to think about it, but I have not come up with any objections at all or any problems with the language. I think it's very well written, very well conceived. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Prithrick.
So a couple things I'd like to say. First off, if anybody's watching, what this shows is while we have our eyes on this immediate crisis, which is COVID-19, we're also have our eyes on our long-term goals. And I think we can do both in terms of responding to a public health emergency that, while it seems like it's going to go on forever, will be kind of temporal. But I think we're also making progress on really, really long-term goals. Our comprehensive plan really emphasized the value of this kind of stewardship, and our own council priorities in 2020 emphasized sustainability and economic development related to housing. So that points to this ordinance. And again, I want to echo the thanks, because this is many years and many meetings and many, many hours of staff time that went into striking a careful balance between our desire both to have new housing development in Oxford, other development, while protecting trees, which in the past, if you haven't been on planning commission, you wouldn't know that, for example, subdivisions could come to us without any real analysis of what was on the site. So where the roads were going and the houses were going, you could have a mature woodland, and our code had zero protection for that. And that just didn't reflect our values or our comprehensive plan. And so, but, we're trying to balance, and this is where being a counselor is easy, because this has gone through so many fine-tooth combs with so many brains working on this. So I really do want to echo thanks to Sam Perry and to Zach Moore, Wright Gwynn, and all of the environmental commissioners who really persisted with this, planning commissioners who saw this multiple times. And so thanks to everyone. I looked at the ordinance, and it's an incredible balance of all these values. So thanks.
All right. Mr. Bracken.
Yeah, I just wanted to affirm my agreement with all the other counselors' comments. And I just wanted to add, just for the public's knowledge, that the areas outside of the buffer still get preserved. They just don't need to be surveyed because they're not expected to be taken down. Is that correct, Sam?
That's correct. They do not have to be surveyed, but they do have to be noted on the plans that they will be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Just a note to the public on this. So since this affected 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 code sections, we have to vote on it, eventually vote on it 6 times for each section. So I will have Mrs. Eaton read each portion, and unless anybody has any definite discussion items for each section, we'll just go through them. Yes, Ms. Souther, do you have questions?
I did have one comment. And that is that a citizen was looking at these ordinances, was also impressed by it, but she commented that the list of the trees was too small to read. So maybe online they're larger, I don't know, but on paper, it was too small. So I know that wasn't changed from the past. It's the same list we've always had. And I think it's a great list. And I think that the city has put together an excellent list of native trees and trees that are hopefully are sustainable and will sustain the future.
And I believe that list is on the website. Mr. Perry can correct me. Yes.
If I could interject there, it could be perhaps, Ms. Southard, that the list they were referring to was the example tree survey, which had actually that was not the street tree list that we have in our requirements. That was an example to show that the numbers on the drawing, how they referred like a legend to the list of trees. And so we had to shrink that drawing down to fit it in the agenda packet. So that possibly could have been what they were referring to. And you're right, it is not legible because of how small it became.
So perhaps for the next reading of it, it could be larger so that the public can see that more easily.
We can work on that with clerk as far as maybe making a digital document instead of a scanned document, perhaps. Thank you for that comment.
All right. If that's it, I will ask Mrs. Eaton to read the first reading, the second code section that this touches.
An ordinance repealing Oxford Codified Ordinance, sections 1101.4400 entitled General Statement, 1101.4403 entitled Typical Sections, and 1101.4410 entitled Landscape Plan, and Chapter 1101 entitled Subdivision Regulations, and adopting new Oxford Codified Ordinance, sections 1101.4400 General Statement, 1101.4403 Typical Sections, and 1101.4410 Landscape Plan, and Chapter 1101 Subdivision Regulations, to be in compliance with Chapter 1148 of the Oxford Codified Ordinances entitled Landscaping and Tree Preservation.
All right. Any questions on this section? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the first reading, if you would, Mrs. Eaton.
Ordinance repealing Oxford Codified Ordinance, sections 1143.03C13, landscaping, 1143.05C13, landscaping, and 1143.07D13, landscaping, in Chapter 1143 entitled Districts, and adopting new Oxford Codified Ordinance, sections 1143.03C13, landscaping, 1143.05C13, landscaping, and 1143.07D13, entitled Landscaping, in Chapter 1143 entitled Districts, to be in compliance with Chapter 1148 of the Oxford Codified Ordinances entitled Landscaping and Tree Preservation.
All right, any discussion or comments on this section? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the fourth section. If you will read our first reading, Ms. Eaton.
An ordinance repealing Oxford Codified Ordinance, sections 1143.12D2, entitled Landscaping, and 1143.16D, entitled Supplementary Regulations, in Chapter 1143 entitled Districts, and adopting new Oxford Codified Ordinance, sections 1143.12D2 entitled Landscaping, and 1143.16D entitled Supplementary Regulations, in Chapter 1143 entitled Districts, to be in compliance with Chapter 1148 of the Oxford Codified Ordinances entitled Landscaping and Tree Preservation.
All right, any questions or discussion on this section? Seeing none, Ms. Eaton, if you will read our first reading.
An ordinance repealing Oxford Codified Ordinance, sections 1145.01A entitled Purpose, 1145.05A entitled Preliminary Plan, and 1145.06B entitled General Decision Standards, in Chapter 1145 entitled Planned Developments, and adopting new Oxford Codified Ordinance Sections 1145.01A entitled Purpose, 1145.05A entitled Preliminary Plan, and 1145.06B General Decision Standards, in Chapter 1145 entitled Planned Developments, to be in compliance with Chapter 1148 of the Oxford Codified Ordinances entitled Landscaping and Tree Preservation.
Right, any questions or comments on this section? Mr. Snavely?
My quick comment is that back in the old days, the clerk of council would have to read the entire ordinance. And so I'm glad that she only has to read the title.
As am I.
Okay, seeing no questions or discussion, Ms. Eaton, if you will read our sixth first reading section, please.
An ordinance repealing Oxford Codified Ordinance Sections 1147.02A1 entitled Contents of Application for Conditional Use Permit, and 1147.02C2 entitled General Decision Standards, in Chapter 1147 entitled Conditional Uses, and adopting new Oxford Codified Ordinance Sections 1147.02A1 Contents of Application for Conditional Use Permit, and 1147.02C2 entitled General Decision Standards, to be in compliance with Chapter 1148 of the Oxford Codified Ordinances entitled Landscaping and Tree Preservation.
All right, are there any comments or discussion on this section? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the seventh first reading. Ms. Eaton, if you will read this section.
An ordinance repealing Oxford Codified Ordinance Section 1149.05E6 entitled Landscaping, and Chapter 1149 entitled Parking and Site Access, and adopting new Oxford Codified Ordinance Section 1149.05C6 entitled Landscaping, and Chapter 1149 entitled Parking and Site Access, to be in compliance with Chapter 1148 of the Oxford Codified Ordinances entitled Landscaping and Tree Preservation.
All right, any questions or discussion on this section? All right, seeing none, we will move on to our eighth section, if you please, Ms. Eaton.
An ordinance adopting additional exhibits into Attachment H entitled Typical Section Drawings in Part 11, Title 1 of the Oxford Codified Ordinances, to be in compliance with Chapter 1148 of the Oxford Codified Ordinances entitled Landscaping and Tree Preservation.
All right, any questions or discussion? I see Mr. Prithik has a question.
So I want to just make a point, which is to reiterate the reason why we've read through all of these and all these different code sections need to be changed is because this ordinance, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Perry, only applies to new development. That's why we're amending our subdivision code and our planned use development and our conditional use and our parking lot standards. So, just so there's no confusion here, this doesn't apply to just if you want to take down a tree in your yard or manage your property. It's only if you're actually doing new development or I think it also applies to significant new construction. So, previous versions of this would have applied to all of us and all of our properties, but that's where the compromise comes here. This is just focused on new development. I just think it bears repeating because we try to make this a targeted ordinance, and that's why there's so many code sections that are touched on here.
Yes,
That's correct. New development. Thank you.
thanks, Sam.
Mhm.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ms. Eaton. All right. We will move on to our ninth first reading of the night. Ms. Eaton, if you will please read that.
An ordinance accepting the recommendation of the Planning Commission and approving the final planned development application for South Farms Section 4 with conditions.
All right. Mr. Perry, are you going to go over this section with us?
Yes,
All
I
right.
will.
Thank you.
Your Honor. I'll share my screen again. This is a recommendation from Planning Commission for a development that has already had the preliminary approval. So this is the final approval. So without that final approval, they're not able to move forward with construction or any selling of lots or any further stage. So that in between the two steps allows any additional detail to come forward. And in this case, there wasn't really that much change to it, but there was more detail to get it to the point to show that it met all the code, and the Planning Commission found that. So I'll share my screen on showing you the overview of that. All right, you should see a slide that says South Farm Section 4.
Yes, we did.
Okay, thank you. So it's almost a 7-acre area that is off of Kerr Road and Roberts Drive near the existing Morgan Circle. So if you're familiar with Cobblestone Church in that area, it's just south of there. So this gives an overview of it. And if you can see my cursor, it's in this area here. And actually it looks like there's a street there, but it's not. It's a platted street that was never built. And there are 13 lots that were platted, none of which were built. So it's just been sitting there vacant. And you can see from the aerial photo, the overview, that it's all platted, but if you were to walk out there, you wouldn't see anything but a cleared area for the roadbed, which was never built. And so this slide shows the zoning, which in yellow is the R1B, which is the medium density single family zoning. So this does not change the zoning of the area, but it does amend the regulations because it is a planned development and a subdivision. There are smaller lots than what are normally permitted by the R1B underlying zoning. So you can see the surrounding context, the church, the pond that is maintained by the existing subdivision, and you can see the vacant land across Kerr Road, just to give you some context there. This slide just shows the ownership around the area, and you can see that the boundary of the subdivision in red is gaining a little bit of land to take in for the overall planned development in order to have the required open space. We just talked about the tree ordinance. That's part of that overall process of review, the open space, the canopy. Those are all standards that are necessary to get to this point. And so you'll see as we go through these slides that these lots will get smaller. These are the platted lots. The new development will have 25 lots instead of 13. So it replats the current development. So this is an overview showing what I mentioned already, how there's no development within the boundary. And then you can see the existing South Farm Section 1, which is on Morgan Circle. And you may not remember that it was titled South Farm Section 2, the proposed development in the preliminary review, but because there was another Section 2 on the books that was recorded through the surveyor's guidance, they felt that it was best to have a new name. So that's where the 4 came from. And so now you can see the difference in the lot sizes and the density compared to the previous plans that were approved. So this slide shows the untouched areas that will be beyond the lots. So you can see there's a buffer with the neighboring community there. And through the Planning Commission process, there were comments from Mr. Rudolph, who spoke at both meetings, which provided some helpful context. And there is additional open space on the west. And you'll notice that there is actually alley access for the western part of the development. So these lots on this side would have rear loaded garages, whereas the ones on the east side would be front loaded. And this shows the example house that the 2 different styles. These aren't exact, but as long as they're similar to these, then they can be approved administratively when it comes to the building permit. And the Planning Commission recommendation was to approve, and there were several conditions which you will see in your in your packet, and I can put those on the screen if you'd like, or I can go through them, however you'd like to do that. Maybe I'll put them up on the screen there for you, just to be consistent. So this is actually right out of your packet, the ordinance. So the Planning Commission found that there was substantial compliance with the preliminary approval. So as far as the merits of the review, there really wasn't a lot of new information that was provided. There was some more clarification that was brought in, but all of these waivers and adjustments to lot sizes, to the street length, to the screening, all of those things were consistent with the previous review. New things such as where is the mailbox going to go? And I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Postal Service is not serving new suburban mailbox style mailboxes anymore. So there has to be a cluster box unit. And so there was a lot of back and forth between staff and the applicant on getting the correct placement of that. And we got some guidance from the police chief as well on that for safety purposes. So I won't go through each one of those conditions. There is a timing aspect, though, that might be of interest to the public, that the final plan approval by code would have 2 years of validity. This was extended during the review process to be 5 years. The development rate in Oxford is somewhat slower than we see typically in the region. So by adding that additional time in to the outset, it doesn't give an open sort of, any time, when it can be completed, but it does give it some level of expectation so that if rules, policies, expectations change in the future, there's a sunset for that if the development were to happen to not move forward. And then I'll go ahead and go through a couple other items too that are all related, kind of the way we did the tree ordinance. Because this is a plan development and a subdivision, and there was a street that was already there, there had to be a right-of-way vacation in order to adjust the geometry of that street a little bit. And so that's why they're ordered the way they are on the agenda, was the plan development, the right-of-way vacation, and then the approval of the actual plat so that the lots can be recorded, split, sold at the appropriate time. So this drawing shows the geometric adjustment. So what the vacation ordinance on the agenda would do is actually completely give up that right of way and then place it back with the new subdivision plat. So the actual age is very, very similar, but this, because of the different lot sizes, this allows that adjustment to happen. And this was the previous plat. So this right-of-way would all be vacated with this ordinance, and then the new right-of-way with the new subdivision plat would replace that. And that's what this slide will show. I'll back it up there. Sorry to keep flashing the screen, but this is the layout that will be reflected in the final. So the final plat and the final plan are essentially the same thing. The final plan brings in all of those contextual zoning code requirements, whereas the final plat is just the surveyed lots and their boundaries. And that is my presentation from the Planning Commission recommendation.
All right.
For approval.
Thank you very much. I want to go to Mrs. Green. Did the petitioner want to speak to this tonight?
I was going to ask, we have Mr. Bayer and Miss Reed and Mr. Shea on, and if any of you would like to speak, Mr. Bayer, you can just turn on your microphone. Etta or Mike, you would need to click the raise hand button and I could unmute you. I am not seeing any raised hands or anything, so
Good evening. I apologize for my delay getting off mute. We do not have any additional additional information to share on top of Mr. Perry's presentation. So, but we are available if there's any other questions you might have for us.
All right, very good. Appreciate that. Okay, at this point, I will turn it over to council for questions and discussion. Ms. Southard?
Does the new plan include the fire chief's recommendation that the road be widened? That was my first question. And my second question is, it's unusual that, you know, we're considering all these tree preservation ordinances and this development at the same time. Will the tree preservation ordinances apply to the new development, since they would be approved all at the same time?
So I'll start with the first question. The fire chief's comment was satisfied by the turning radius adjustment for the alley. I believe that was the concern. So I believe the applicant actually provided a turning template to make sure that, because the alley is a little bit narrower than a normal street, in order to get onto it, there has to be sort of a geometric approach in order to make that happen. And I believe that's been accommodated, and the fire chief has approved what has been revised and submitted. And the second question, if you're satisfied with the answer on that one, is that the tree ordinance will not apply because of when it was submitted. So while it is around the same time, and I believe the way it's designed, it does sort of leave those back areas alone, but the new standards, you're correct, would not apply.
Mr. Snavely?
I would just like to comment that planning was very much in favor of it. It's a new kind of development for Oxford and provides an option that's not readily available elsewhere in the community. And we felt like it deserves the opportunity to see if there's a sufficient market for it.
Yes, I concur. I remember when we debated this and I feel the same. So, all right, Mr. Prithrick.
So real quick comment and then a question. I mean, number one, if this is a substantial conformance with the preliminaries, then it's pretty much a straightforward kind of deal. I would comment that I do appreciate that the street widths have come down a little bit, that you were able to accommodate the public safety. I think sometimes we err on more width than we need, and then we have to pave it ad infinitum with all the stormwater and open space. So the fact that you were able to get some width down and trade it for tree lawn, for example, was really good. So my question is there was a reference to the homeowners association and the access to the open space in the pond, but it was outside the sphere of the application. But Mr. Perry, could you talk a little bit about that and, you know, the state of the conversations about the two developments and the HOA and the access to the pond and that kind of stuff?
I believe that's all been addressed. There was some follow-up after the initial final plan presentation, that it seemed to me that the concern that was raised by one of the residents, Mr. Rudolph on Morgan Circle, seemed to be accommodated by the applicant. So there are a couple different homeowner associations there. So I think it came down to who's going to be responsible for that area and whether it would be shared or not. So it seemed to me that it was worked out, and you're right, it's not something that the city is directly responsible for. We do have some interest in making sure that the city is not responsible for those common spaces. So there is some interest in making sure that everyone is kind of getting along. But I think it was just more of just a matter of timing for the existing neighborhood and the new. I didn't observe any real problems for not working that out. But the Mr. Bear, Ms. Reed are on the line. I'm sure they could add some more light to that if necessary.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing if we have any additional comments from the petitioners about the homeowners association?
I don't see any from the attendees. It would be, and then Mr. Bayer is a panelist, so he could speak if he would like to.
I think Mr. Perry covered it pretty well. We don't have any additional input to provide on that front.
Okay. All right. At this point, unless anybody has anything else, we will see this again in 2 weeks. And appreciate the petitioners for being on the line. Appreciate you hanging in there, given all things considered right now. I'm happy this is moving forward. Okay. At this point, why don't we go on to our 10th first reading of the evening? Ms. Eaton, if you'll please read that.
An ordinance vacating right-of-way associated with Roberts Drive and Hoover Drive, as was previously dedicated by OR 7959, page 1551, replat for South Farm Section 2 and 2A.
All right, and Sam explained this, so any comments or discussion on this? I thought it made sense. All right. Let's move on to our 11th first reading. If you'll read that last one, Mrs. Eaton, please.
An ordinance approving the final subdivision application for South Farm Section 4 with conditions.
And again, Sam explained this one, so this just is the new section that takes the place of the vacated. So any questions or discussion? All right, we'll see this again in 2 weeks as well. We have no second readings tonight. And so that brings us to announcements and communications. So I'll just go around the horn and I will start with Mr. Elliott tonight.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Just have a couple of things. Councilor Snavely asked me to comment on an updated report from McCullough High Memorial Hospital on the number of Oxford Township and city cases of COVID-19 reported and deaths from the virus. So I did speak with Mike Everett, who is the president and chief operating officer for McCullough High Memorial Hospital. Spoke to him Monday morning through our twice weekly leadership meeting. And we have the fire chief, police chief, and assistant city manager usually participate, as well as our other partners, which includes the hospital, of course, the school district, the foundation for the hospital, township, the chamber, of course, Miami University, and Enjoy Oxford. So we've been having these meetings now twice a week, Monday through Friday. But I did ask Mike to give me an update, and he has provided this information. So McCullough High Memorial Hospital has performed 162 COVID-19 tests since March 12th, with 152 resulted out and 10 pending, with 121 negative and 31 positive. On April 7th, 2 weeks ago, we were getting a positivity percentage of 31%. Today, we have trended down to a 26 positivity rate. Total deaths, 1. This person was intubated here in McCullough High Memorial Hospital and then transferred to Bethesda North Hospital. We currently have no ICU patients, and occupancy of our inpatient medical care unit is currently 28%. We have actively planned and worked our pandemic plans to care for patients. And while we are trending down, we are still prepared and have capacity/resources to care for our community. We appreciate the incredible support for our Oxford community, local leaders, along with police and fire divisions. Thank you, Mike Everett. So Mike and his entire staff at McCullough High Memorial Hospital are doing an incredible job for our community, and I'm sure you will agree, during this pandemic. So thank you, Mike, and everyone at McCullough High Memorial Hospital for the outstanding job you're doing. We are indeed fortunate and blessed to have McCullough Hyde Memorial Hospital in our community. So Bill had asked, as you recall from my reading his request, about the city and township confirmed cases. So the numbers that I just mentioned, they represent the activity for McCullough Hyde Memorial Hospital, which has a service area extending well beyond Oxford and Oxford townships. For example, it includes Franklin County in Indiana, and we all know that the Brookville area has been a hot spot. So if we want to look at just the Oxford and Oxford Township numbers, the Butler County Health Department has provided confirmed cases by zip code. And the 45056 zip code, as you know, includes an area greater than those two entities. It includes parts of Riley and Milford Townships. But in the 45056 zip code, then, the Butler County Health District, as of April 13th, and they have not updated this, I expect that to come out later this week, they reported 8 confirmed cases, which at that time represented 6.6% of the total Butler County confirmed cases. Once again, that's as of April 13th. The Butler County Health Department, though, today released new county totals for the entire county, and they show 185 confirmed cases, 3 probable cases, for a total of 188 cases and 3 deaths in the entire county. So if we use this new county total and apply the same percentage, 6.6%, this would mean that the 45056 zip code has 12 cases, basically an additional 4 cases. So the number represents where the cases reside, where those individuals reside. And, so I wanted to provide that information. I think it's useful for the public to know that Mike has been very transparent, very willing to communicate the information as much as he can, within the limitations of the law. And of course, as we all know, this situation is evolving. I mean, we pay very close attention to Governor DeWine's 2 p.m. news conferences and what he is discussing with us. And certainly I feel that he's doing an excellent job in leading our state. As we all know, it is very important to keep practicing physical distancing, washing hands, using other health protocols so that we don't have any community spread and reduce the chances of that. I mean, basically, our behavior will control our fate, until there's a vaccine established or developed for us. So, it's important for us to continue the great work that I think we're doing here in Oxford and hopefully throughout the state. And lastly, and if you have any questions for me on that, I'd be glad to answer. But I did want to comment on one other thing that I think is also pertinent for us right now. And that is the COVID-19 crisis and Oxford's needy residents, which we are all concerned with. We're working with our charitable organizations. Sam Perry is leading that effort for the city. So this includes the Family Resource Center. If you've had a chance to get onto their website, they have a lot of good information on there. They also let people know that they're not in their offices, that please give them a call and they'll get back to you with an appointment. So working with the Family Resource Center, TOPS or the Food Pantry, the Senior Center, and of course the Talawanda School District, who is still providing meals for the school-age children. So as we know, our charitable organizations are a vital part of our social safety net, if not throughout the whole country. They provide food, shelter, and cash assistance. So as I mentioned, Sam has been in contact with our local organizations, and as now don't believe they've relayed to us that they're in desperate need of anything right now. But certainly the community has shown their support with donations, both cash, food, so on and so forth. And I don't know if Sam, if you want to add anything before I close, but one last thing, as you'll remember at the last council meeting, when Jason raised the question, we did suggest that we're going to be receiving some additional community development block grant funds. And could be as much as $70,000. Once we get a firm figure and a date as to when we'll receive those funds, we'll be coming back to you with some recommendations. And of course, the final decision for how we would utilize those funds rests with City Council. So with that, Sam, if you have anything you want to add to the comments that I made, go right ahead.
Thank you, Doug. Yes, that is correct. That at this time, Family Resource Center, the pantry, TOPS, and seniors are all maintaining okay. I will say that, like many organizations in the community, they are a small staff. And so if something were to happen with their existing staffing, they would need some help to continue their operations. But right now they're doing okay. They've got good support financially and labor and facilities wise. The Family Resource Center did give me a response today that they have seen a definite uptick in the past week on requests for rent assistance and utilities assistance, but they do have enough cash right now to make those helps where necessary. They have changed their guidelines to make more significant impacts, but they are doing ongoing fundraising. They are adding staff as needed, so they're kind of dynamically responding to what the needs are. So I would say they're doing okay right now, but they are looking at the long-term impacts, and I'm sure will keep us up to date if there is a need that we need to be aware of. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
And that's all I have then, Mike, for you this
All right.
evening.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Mr. Dreisbach, do you have anything you'd like to add tonight?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Just a thank you to the service department employees. They've been implementing our contingency plans. Hopefully the public's not seen any changes in the services we provide or our contractors provide. They're working, we're providing all of our utility services. Rumpke's doing a great job making sure recycling and waste is removed. So just a thank you to our employees who are working hard, but also working very smartly. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. And I also, big thumbs up to everybody at the city for everything they're doing, setting an example, keeping things moving. It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I will ask Ms. Green if she has anything she'd like to add tonight.
Yes, thank you. I also want to let you know that we have all other staff members on as attendees. So staff, if you can hear me and you want to share something with council tonight, please go ahead and click that raise hand button and I'll see it. And I'll go ahead and give my update and then I'll check back on the list here. I just wanted to give you a brief update on the gift card stimulus program. As of a few minutes ago, we've had 54 applications come in, and 14 of those are minority-owned business owners. We did send out an email to all the applicants and let them know the timeline. We will be meeting with the CIC board on Friday and determining award amounts, and then I'll be working with Joe Newland's team to start processing those awards early next week. And I'm also working with Enjoy Oxford to start building out an e-commerce website. So things will be moving pretty quickly. If we don't get out the entire award amount this Friday, we'll do a second round. So we'll be sure to keep you posted on that program. The other thing that we're working on is a move out coordination with Miami University. So working with the Board of Health and also the police department on communicating with the students who still reside off campus about a safe move out practice. And also if they decide to move back for a little while. And so we've sent out some guidelines with that, but primarily if they're moving out, we've asked them to respect social distancing guidelines to plan ahead so they don't all move out at the same time in a big house. And to also, we provided with no Share Fest, which is unfortunate, we have provided other ways that they can donate both food and household items to either Goodwill or the neighborhood share site that Councilperson Ragu manages. And then as a last resort, we have a trash sign up page. So let us know that we have extra trash so we can monitor for that as well. So those are my big updates this evening. And I do not see any of their staff with their hands raised at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Eaton, do you have anything you'd like to add tonight?
Nothing tonight. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Kennard, is there anything you'd like to add?
I just want to say I have the privilege of working for a number of public sector clients, and Oxford's, the spirit of the staff and counselors and the citizens of working together. Oxford exemplifies that, but virtually every community that I've worked with has the same spirit of all of you. And I think it's really a tribute to all of us as Ohioans and our ability as a nation to try and come together during some really extraordinary times. So I want to say thank you to all of you and to the citizens of Oxford. It's been a privilege.
Thank you. And not to skip Mr. Perry, but just want to check, see if you have anything else you'd like to add tonight.
I do not. Thank you.
All right. We will move on to council. I'll start with Councilor Ragu. If you have anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, as the state will start to slowly open up after May 1st, I think that, we're not the first country to be going through this. So it's important to look at where it first was affected. I have a good friend who lives in Hong Kong and has been, basically speaking to us from our future. And they experienced their second wave a couple of weeks ago, and they had to crack back down on social distancing. And they're right now, although they're not as on lockdown as we are, they're kind of looking that way. And the only way that they're able to refrain from social distancing or trying to open up again is if there's been no new active cases for 2 incubation periods. So that's about 2 to 4 weeks. So I think that the concern as we go forward, I understand there's a lot of protests, about opening up, but I think that learning from other countries, it's important to realize that what we might be facing over the next month or so. And I think it's reasonable to expect that cases will go up. So, can't emphasize enough, do whatever you can, wear your face mask, wash your hands, still social distance, even though they say that maybe you don't have to, we will still have to. And just an update from the veterinary front, they just this past week, right after they announced to open back up after May 1st, they sent out another email saying, hey, just want to make sure you're ready to volunteer for the surge. What kind of skills do you have? So that's, I think that they're gearing up for it. They're gearing up for the higher number of cases. And, from a local standpoint, that the pandemic has only magnified the pre-existing problems, the problems with minorities, the problems with the underprivileged, the problems with the people that have really been underserved for decades. And I look forward to hopefully the next meeting, there should be a resolution talking about a condemnation of hate speech and discrimination. And I hope that as we look towards giving money to the underserved populations, we look at what the federal government, the state government, those people that are being left out, and some of the biggest population from all the networks that I've been in contact with are the undocumented workers. You require Social Security to get any type of assistance. And so I think that's something that we should be looking at, although maybe our population is not as great, they are still a population that we could help from a local level.
All right. Thanks a lot. Move on to Councilor Ellerby.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to also echo the sentiments of our city staff. You guys have been doing a fantastic job. Please keep up the good work. And some of the concerns I also share with Councilor Ragu. Our citizens have been doing a great job in containing the issues that we have here. However, it is real. We have had some unfortunate events here, and with the approach of May coming up and the inevitable opening of, we'll just say society, that you will need to be cognizant and you will need to protect yourself. and be mindful of others, because we can easily slip back into a very nasty situation. So thanks again for all the efforts that everybody has done and come together to fight this. But just know that we're not over this yet, and we're going to still have to continue that fight, even though there may be light at the end of the tunnel.
All right, thank you. I'll move on to Counselor Southard.
I don't want to repeat everything that people have said, although I do want to endorse what Councillor Ellerby and Councillor Ragu have said, and also to, say how great it is, how people are grateful that the city is continuing to do so many, keeping things rolling on a steady pace. I also want to mention a couple of things. It's Kiwanis is having a mini food drive for TOPS, for the food pantry. That will be on May 7th. They're asking for specific items that you can look up. I think they want peanut butter and, I don't know, tuna fish and some things like that. I want to say it's been a week of, it is going to be a week of anniversaries, and at times when we would have all gotten together, but now everything has to be virtual. In addition to Arbor Day on Friday, about which we had the proclamation, there is Earth Day tomorrow. And normally we would have had a gathering. We won't, but I want to make sure that we acknowledge that it is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. It started in 1969 after an oil spill. And the theme this year is climate action. So that's right up what we are working on. And so I want to acknowledge that and make that point. The other thing is that today is Yom HaShoah, and normally that is Holocaust Remembrance Day. And normally in every other year, we would have had a proclamation that the students at Miami would have instigated, but they're not here. And we would today be standing together at Miami, reading the names of victims. The names of some of the millions of child victims every year, and the community members and university students have always gotten together to do this. So it's something I have to say I miss. So this year has been different, as we know, this year is different, and we can't gather, but we still remember, and we must light candles. And so at a normal council meeting, I would not be lighting a candle, but I'm showing you the candle that I lit and that I light on every Yom HaShoah, every Holocaust Remembrance Day, in memory of people who died. It's time for me to blow it out because it's sunset. And as you know, holiday observances begin the night before and end at sunset. So sunset to sunset. Anyway, this day of memory, I want to say something about this since we didn't have an opportunity to read a proclamation. And I want to say that this day of memory began by government decree in Israel in 1953. And some nations observe January 27th because that's the day that the concentration camp of Auschwitz was liberated. We know that although millions died in the death camps or concentration camps that were labor camps, most people, most Jews, were murdered in public squares or by their neighbors. All four of my grandparents were murdered. My grandfather was among the Jewish men rounded up into a synagogue in Lithuania, and the synagogue was torched. My grandmother was shot to death in a concentration camp in Poland. My maternal grandfather died on the way from Belgium, where he was in hiding in Poland. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, remained in hiding in an attic in Brussels and survived physically, but she was in fact shattered and took her own life a few years later. So the word genocide, that means race murder, was invented by a man named Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jewish lawyer who, in desperation, lobbied the United Nations to make genocide a crime against humanity, a prosecutable offense, which of course it now is, rather than something punishable only as an internal national event. The genocide of the Armenians in 1915 was the model for Hitler's war against the Jews. And I say all this, to the students who are not here, the Miami students who would normally we would be standing together, and I want to acknowledge them and their efforts to make our city a model, really, in acknowledging this past. And I want to read quickly what Pastor Martin Niemöller wrote, and you know this, of course, but it's worth repeating again and again and again. And first they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. So we must speak out against discrimination and hatred of anyone, any religious, ethnic, or racial group, or anyone targeted for beliefs, behavior, or anything else, gender, disability, everything, anything. And especially now, we've got to stop dangerous nationalism. And we must remember always, we always must remember, but we have to remember especially today. And that's just what I wanted to say today to you and to our community. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I see a hand from Mrs. Green.
I just want to let you know that Bill Snavely has called in, and when you call on him, I will unmute him so he can speak. Thank you.
Okay. Why don't we go to Bill right now?
Okay, Bill, you're unmuted.
Okay, great. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I have been listening, although my computer screen no longer works with Zoom. I want to, in particular, thank our city staff. They continue to do, I think, a fabulous job, and that's all the way up and down the line. I think that social distance or physical distancing does work, and the numbers that we have from McCullough-Hyde indicate that. I was a little bit disturbed to see some individuals in town that seem to be ignoring those. That's not a lot. I think most people are following the guidelines pretty directly, but there are house parties, there are people running together. So I would just encourage people to stick it out and let's get through this thing as unscathed as possible. There was one death, and it happened to be one of my neighbors, and so it does hit home in that respect. I want to also indicate my support for Governor DeWine, and I think he's done a really good job. And finally, I want to acknowledge the comments made just a moment ago and indicate my support for the Jewish community. That's it.
All right, thank you. All right, now we'll go to Councilor Bracken.
Thank you. And a lot of what I'm saying is going to be repeating, but yes, thank you for those words, Edna. They were great and really important to remember that. I'd also like to thank staff. They've been doing a great job, really help things. On social distancing and everything else, I know people are getting tired and it's going to go on for a long time, but I wanted to point out one thing that a lot of people miss. The economy and our health are not competing against each other. They're on the same side. The only way our economy is going to improve is if people don't have fear of death and illness. So we need to conquer the virus if we want to move forward, because if we don't, we will have more deaths, we will have more illness, and that fear will keep people from coming out, will keep people from going to work. And the consequences of those who are ill or dying is horrible in itself. We shouldn't even have to argue the economic side, but the economic impact from them, because they are lost forever, is far worse than quarantine. And so if you listen to the economists, if you listen to those who model this stuff, and if you listen to the historians from the 1918 pandemic, what you want to do, even if you're concentrating on the economy, is care about our health and reduce this virus and keep it down. And if we don't follow the protocols we've been, we're just going to have spikes again, and it's going to shut everything down again, much worse than it did before. And ultimately, it will cause more harm than good. And it's going to go on for a while, because without mass immunity, without a vaccine, without prophylactics that can prevent this, all we have right now is social distancing, masks, cleanliness, hygiene, washing hands. And so we need to keep that up. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that while our charities are doing great work, as they always do, and they're doing relatively well right now in regards to their normal level of resources, they aren't always able to help all members of the community in every way that those members have needs. We have a homeless population. We have people who are struggling every day. And so while our charities are doing relatively well by their normal levels of resources, that doesn't mean they don't need more. They always need more. There's always help there that's needed for the most vulnerable. And as Councilor Ragu mentioned, the current situation will only exacerbate that. And so we really need to look forward to that, look to that going forward, to make sure that we get ahead of that and we provide them what they need. So I think we all want to do that, and I hope we do that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Prithridge.
So I would like to start out by honoring a CIC, a long-term CIC member, Mike Davis, who, in addition to his service with the Talawanda School District, was a citizen volunteer on an important commission and provided really great expertise on the CIC. So it was a loss not only to the community and to the Talawanda School District, but the city of Oxford also. So we missed having him on the CIC. And because I think the CIC is suddenly even more relevant than it ever was. So I want to thank those people on the CIC who, and particularly staff, especially Jessica. I think that the way we're moving forward on the gift card stimulus is really great. And in terms of figuring out how to do it fairly, in a way that's fair and transparent, you can look to see what happened in Washington and with the federal stimulus to appreciate how our stimulus will really help small local businesses. And so encourage people, if they've not applied already, to do so. I think it's by end of day on Thursday is the deadline. The CIC will meet on Friday. There'll be an initial disbursement, and if there are remaining funds, and if there's greater need, then the CIC has already developed some criteria for how to evaluate that. While we're on the idea of stimulus, I don't know that anybody's watching, but most of us, if we are Social Security paying, have received a stimulus check. And I would encourage people to think about how to use that to support their local economy. Gift card purchases as an individual, pump money into businesses now, and you can redeem those later when social distancing lifts and you can go out. So if you just got a direct deposit in your account, think of not having it sit there. Think of how you can stimulate your local economy. I think that our local nonprofits, whether you donate to the COVID-19 fund at the Oxford Community Foundation or to those individual nonprofits to help those in need, I think for those of us who maybe don't need the stimulus as much as others, could think about how to pass it on through to the community. I say that in particular because I think this is going to be a long, drawn out affair. I think that the economic repercussions of this we're going to suffer for some time. So anyway, last point on that is that I'm really glad we're moving forward with the tree ordinance, because it is Earth Day, and COVID-19, while it's an incredible challenge to us, it's shown how capable we are of radically reorienting the way we live in short order in the face of a threat. And I'm one of those people who believes that climate change poses as great an existential threat or greater than COVID-19 does. So I hope that we can not only stop doing good work we need to do in the long term, but maybe learn from COVID-19 to do things differently. So I'm glad that boards and commissions are getting going again and making progress on long-term stuff, even while we're trying to get through the short-term crisis. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have, again, a list of people to thank this week. I want to thank all the bank employees who are deemed essential, particularly the tellers who are manning the teller lines at all the banks, doing face-to-face interactions every day with their mask and with a lot of hand sanitizer. I want to thank all the staff at our grocery stores that are working to keep our shelves stocked so we don't have to worry too much about keeping food in our houses. Again, I want to thank city staff, particularly Jessica Green, for getting us online tonight. That worked again, all pretty much flawlessly. I have one last plea tonight. I'm going out to the landlords again. We're trying to cope with the off-campus students moving out in a few weeks. And if I could just have the landlords, some of you have done this, but perhaps extend the move-out date as much as a week, because we are trying to avoid getting a lot of people together. We're trying to enhance social distancing. We're trying to cut down on crowds of people moving out of their off-campus houses. So if you could give them some more time to move out, that would help us with this, so we wouldn't have to worry about getting too many people together in one place. Just a reminder to everybody to hang in there. What we're doing is working, and just to hang in there. So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
All right, Ms. Eaton, for formality, will you please call the roll so we can adjourn?
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely, Mayor Smith.
Yes.
Yes. All right, thank you all again, and we are adjourned.
Thanks,
Night,
everyone.
everyone.
Stay safe.
Night.
Everyone.